Today, we yearn for life's ending. On Friday night, I was meeting in room 303 with this guy, Jack. When he said something so nasty, I threatened him. I didn't threaten his life or his existence, rather his soul. It was his identity that I threatened. I called him out for who he is. Oddly enough, it's who most of us are right now. This was the beginning of a new club that I'd began at the behest of Dr. Arita. The reason I snapped when Jack said this despicable thing is because Dr. Arita had said a similar thing when we discussed initiating this club. I've thought about it quite a bit, and I think the reason it annoys me so much is because they're both clearly bluffing. Within the psychology department, Dr. Arita is the last one to arrive every morning, despite being the department chair. It was Friday morning, a week before what would end up being the first meeting of this new club. Her and I were the first two in the front office, not talking much. It was still very early. We were both noticing the television break news about UAPs that had been spotted flying over a nuclear silo in South Dakota. Suddenly, a professor, Annabelle Judy, walked through the front door with superfluous energy. She then stood beside us to see what we were watching. When she realized what it was, she spoke quietly to Dr. Rita, saying, "I used to not believe in aliens." Dr. Rita questioned her on the used to part. Annabelle Judy then said to her, "The fabric keeping your curves from busting out of your dress doesn't exist on Earth." Still watching the TV, excluded from their conversation, a look of disgust came over my face. Apparently, Dr. Arita took offense as well because she shook her head and walked back to her office. I followed her, leaving Professor Judy behind. When we were alone, I came out with it. We're teaching these students theories and abstractions. I was lost when I left university because nothing I was taught had anything to do with reality. I would like to begin a club that gives students the tools they need to succeed. It'll be the Psychology of Weightlifting and Debt Management Club. I knew she'd be hesitant, but that comment from Professor Judy and the existing drama she'd been dealing with surrounding tenured professors in general clearly had her irked. Plus, when I said the name of the club, her face became solemn. I think she assumed I was wasting her time. She was a brick wall to my request. Given that I was a graduate assistant and not supposed to initiate clubs or programs without oversight, she told me I'd need to get a tenured professor's commitment to oversee the club. In truth, I did expect this response, so I had prepared a Trojan horse. I explained to her that the reason for such a specific club is to target an underserved group of students within the psychology program. This group of students has no professors to oversee the club because there are no professors who are a part of this group. It is and can only be me who oversees it. This small group, of which there are only 5 students, is men. Now, here is when I pretended to tell her a truth I'd been concealing, but it was really the Trojan horse. I admitted the reason no female professor could oversee it was because men need a space to openly speak about the subject that devours their psychological state more than any other: women. When I said this, an easiness came over her as my intentions now seemed innocuous. Eventually, she agreed to allow me to roll out this club and have the first meeting a week from the day. The one condition was, obviously, that we cannot discuss Dr. Clint David's assertion that an asteroid would, in what is now only 5.5 months, destroy North America. Imminent collision theory had now been deemed malinformation ever since Clint David was arrested. The federal government had pulled purse strings to convince universities from even discussing the topic on any campus across America. After she argued to me about overseeing the club under this one condition, she said this damned sentence so casually it made me question her sanity. She looked down at the papers on her desk and said, "Doesn't really matter. The planet would probably be better off if an asteroid did strike us." I hid my true feelings and left her office as I thought, "Speak for yourself, you crazy bird." Before we get into my threat against Jack and my corresponding response, it's important to talk about this idea of why everyone is yearning for life's ending. Why is everyone yearning for life's ending? It's clear that the front lines of all ideologies, worldviews, religions is the end of the world. All worldviews, all perceptions on what reality is, they all meet at the end of the world. And there's a bunch of fractals, there's a bunch of sub-beliefs of what they could be and how the world will end, and whether it's at the behest of God or whether it's some secular situation. But it's very clear. It's very clear that there are only 3 options for how the world will end. The 3 options are: 1, the world will end in a secular manner. It'll end via the magnetic poles shifting and mass natural cataclysms overtaking the earth. It'll end via an asteroid striking the earth like it did against the dinosaurs, or so the story goes. It'll end via countries attacking each other and escalation and our desire for war that'll end in nuclear destruction. So that's one way that the world will end. That's one way that people believe the world will end, is through some secular path. The other paradigm that people hold towards the end of the world is that it won't end at all. And I would put Eastern philosophies in this realm as well, and Gnostic, knowledge-based philosophies within this paradigm as well. And it is that the world will not end, and even if it does end, there was a natural Big Bang event that started the world, and the end will be the beginning. The end will be the beginning. And whether it's at the behest of something that you would call the source that people correlate with God, or whether it happens in a purely secular way, like in the first option, it won't truly end because it'll just restart. And the third way is that the world will end is that it'll happen at God's hand, under God's will. And the reason why I say that all ideologies and all perspectives meet at this crossroads, at this paradigm, is because I used to think that it was that your worldview, whether it was a certain religion or an ideology, the front lines was your own individual mortality, your own death. And it is kind of that, but the end of the world is like a death of the ecosystem itself. Not only can do the individuals perish, but the place in which we exist perishes as well. And with this third option of it coming from God, that determines what you should do. And my point is, the reason why I say it's the front lines of truth and what an individual should believe is because whether it's coming from governments, principalities, or modern ancient media, it's probably been the same throughout history. It doesn't matter what source it's coming from. You can very clearly see right now that everything that you see in the news and the media it's all framed in this paradigm of the world is ending, and it's always the way they frame it, of course, is a secular ending to the world. They don't consider the fact that it could come at God's hands, or that God will determine when the world ends. They're like they're the talking news heads on social media, on television, anywhere that you can find them, and they have secular atheistic beliefs. And so when they talk about the economy, they don't just talk about the economy doing good or doing bad. They talk about the economy doing good, and the fact that it's doing good is it is a barricade against the end of the world. It is a barricade against, even if that end of the world is an end to society, the structures of civilization, law and order, even if that is the end, the way in which we exist would perish. And if they talk about the economy doing bad, well, they're framing it in terms of, hey, currencies are doing horrible, the economies are about to crash, and there's going to be a new world order. And the paradigm that you hold right now is not true, because there's going to be everything that you think to be true, it's all going to change. And when they talk about, if you're curious and you look into diplomatic relations across the world, you're curious, oh, what's going on in the world? What's going on with diplomatic relations? Well, you do research, and everything that they say about diplomatic relations and the relationship between countries is, well, currently we've got two different sides forming, and you've got the good side and the bad side, and whatever country, whatever side I'm speaking from is the good side, and you better watch out, because these guys across the world have nuclear weapons, and if this escalates, we're at risk of nuclear destruction. And when I was in middle school, I used to notice it all the time because it was prevalent with North Korea. CNN would always put breaking news: North Korea has developed long-range missiles. Now they can send missiles to mainland United States. Be ready, because we are on the precipice of destruction. And they are doing that all the time. All of these media individuals, media organizations, every topic that they discuss is always within this paradigm of, if it goes this way, the world's probably going to end, so we need to go that way. We need for the economy to go that way. We need for diplomatic relations to go that way. Otherwise, going to work doesn't really matter. And working out and training and paying off debt, none of that really matters. The things that you're worried about right now don't really matter, because it's all going to end. And so it's unfortunate, because when you consume that all of the time, when the media is always discussing things in that framework, it's really difficult to not be nihilistic. It's really difficult to have a strong relationship, to delay gratification for the future, to sacrifice today for what's good tomorrow, because you're just constantly being convinced, berated with this idea that tomorrow is not going to exist. So this is an important topic, because if you don't have a belief system around how the world will actually end, then you're going to get blown around in the wind, because people who, whether they're doing it for profit or control, it doesn't really matter, they are doing it. And they're constantly going to be trying to convince you that a secular end to the world is near. So, for example, we'll talk about Christianity, and it's also, interestingly enough, this aspect is the same with Islam. They both think Jesus Christ is going to come and judge the world, and that is how the world is going to end. And that is how the world is going to end. And so, whatever you're being told about asteroids and magnetic poles shifting and nuclear cataclysm, that is not how this environment, that is not how this realm is going to dissolve away, because God has told you how it's going to dissolve away. So whether we get on the brink of that and then Jesus Christ comes back, or if we get so consumed with that God's just like, all right, I'm coming back, I'm shutting this down, I'm judging the world. That is what Christians and Islam believes. Interestingly enough, they both believe it's Jesus Christ that'll be the one to come back. So, technology, in regards to the future, if you don't have a paradigm, if you don't have a strong belief system about what the future will entail and how the future will end, if you don't have a specific belief about how that will occur, you're going to be blown around in the wind, and you're going to inevitably believe the things that they tell you, because they inundate you with this information from multiple different angles and multiple different perspectives. And because of the inundation with it, it would be impossible after a given amount of time to not fall into something like despair and nihilism. So not only are we dealing with that in this current time period, but now we've also got this technology situation. And technology is rattling the future. It's unstable, and maybe that's okay. The future is unstable, and maybe that's okay. And for myself, I remember, it is 2024. I remember in 2016 and prior, and maybe even all the way up to 2020, I believed that I could look towards the future, set goals for myself, and if I worked hard and I sacrificed properly, the goals that are good could be brought to fruition. If I focused on one goal, did everything I could to bring that goal to fruition, it would be possible. But now the future is so shaky, so unstable, because of things like AI and all of the advancements that keep coming out. And the other thing that the media keeps inundating you with is that jobs are going to disappear. AI and technology are going to do a lot of the work that we do currently. Look, it's happening right now. And I struggle with that perspective, because within my subconscious, within my even deep in my mind, I don't actually necessarily believe that that isn't the case, that technology isn't going to do a lot of the jobs. And people say, well, if you're doing creative work, if you're doing artistic work, you'll still be able to do that, because AI is not going to be able to create beauty. AI is not going to be able to match human creation, so you'll be safe, but who's going to consume it? What kind of jobs are people going to do that would consume art? Is there going to be people to consume art? And they compare it to the Industrial Revolution, and the counter argument is that during the Industrial Revolution, we started to make machines started to do the work, factories. But so the things that people had been doing prior, that machines ended up doing much more efficiently, they just got new jobs. And one of the jobs, for example, is if an individual that would take care of horses, Well, now they're a truck driver because now trucks have came to fruition to transport goods, and you can be a truck driver rather than take care of horses. But for me, part of the problem with that is as a species, humanity is in a very precarious situation because we have now been eating a ton of processed food. We have become incredibly lethargic. Those who are obese are more than the population of the world who are starving. So during the Industrial Revolution, people were hungry, diligent, eager to learn new skills in response to technology, but there's a lot of lethargy and everybody's moving around in sludge at the moment. I don't know. For me, I'm not convinced that people will have any sort of motivation to do new jobs, which hammers back at that idea of today we yearn for life's ending because joy, bliss, fulfillment, it all exists in the present moment. But if the future is so unstable, so incredibly uncertain, and for so many people that you can't help but, even if it's only in your subconscious, you can't help but think about the future and dwell on the future because there's an anxiety that you have towards what the future will be like and even just what sort of work you will do. Even if you're in a spot where you could be okay right now, it's hard to not be tyrannized by the future because it's so uncertain at the moment. On a macro scale, collectively, society itself is uncertain. So when that happens, when you have masses of people who are completely uncertain by the future and tyrannized by anxiety, it's like, I don't know how excited they are to live tomorrow. I don't know how excited they are to live the day tomorrow, because there's a lot of fear surrounding tomorrow. There's a lot of the unknown is tomorrow. The unknown is tomorrow more than the unknown has ever existed. And obviously, this is the only time that I've been alive, so I don't know if this has always been the case, but that's why I mentioned 2015 and 2016 and prior and 2020. It seems like we're rapidly escalating into a certain direction, and the future is constantly becoming more unknown and more certain. So in that anxiety and in that despair, and combine that with the inundation from the media and from governments of secular endings to the world, I truly think that there's a cathartic element within it. There's an element of pleasure of looking towards the future and thinking, oh, the world might end tomorrow. I have all of these worries and anxieties, but I just got on the mainstream television channels, Fox News and CNN, and they're talking about how one country in the Middle East is about to respond to an attack from another country in the Middle East, and it is their opinion that it's going to escalate into nuclear war. And we have grown in technology so much. It's not the nuclear weapons of the 1940s. It is much more grandiose. We have hydrogen bombs now. When some of these things start going off, we're going to be in a nuclear winter. Survival is going to be impossible. And that is the implication. That is what they are framing every single news story within that paradigm, that tomorrow is not going to exist, so you might as well live hedon. Maybe they don't say it explicitly, it's all implicit, but tomorrow is not going to exist, so you might as well be hedonistic today. It's a downward spiral because the hedonism and the nihilism pulls you further away from God. And when you go further away from God, your mind fills up with doubt. And when your mind fills up with doubt, you become more anxious about the future. And then you look to the media even more. And whereas you didn't even trust them before, now you're like, well, they've just inundated me. So now I actually just believe the things that they're saying because I've heard it so much. They hammered it into my mind so much. Now I just believe what they're saying. And I think you passively start to desire an end to the torment. And I think a lot of people are in that place where they desire an end for the torment. And it's like a collective thing that we're doing. We are in a weird perverted relationship with the media where we're both very pessimistic, and they give us pessimism, they give us negative ideas constantly, and we demand more of those negative ideas, and it is a downward spiral. So I think the solution, in my opinion, is found in this. I'll use the word bizarre because it is a bizarre situation, but there's something called maybe you can call it the Revelations of Fatima. People call it Our Lady of Fatima. And the story basically goes that there were three children within Portugal in a place called Fatima. That's why it's called Our Lady of Fatima. So you've got these three kids, and they're not even double-digit age. They're like 9 years old. Maybe the most is 11 years old. And it's 1917, and Mary, the mother of Jesus, appears to these children. And the verification of the story is absolutely bizarre. But Mary appears to these children, and she basically gives them a warning, and she's like, the direction that the world is going is not good. Humanity is making God very angry. The sinners need to turn away from their sin and repent and confess and turn back to God. And there's other revelatory things about it as well, such as she told them that there will be martyrdom of bishops and popes, and she requested that Russia become consecrated back to God and back to Christ. But the key is that she said people are sinning and the whole world needs to turn away from God. But she gave a phrase, and the phrase is the key. But before we say the phrase, the verification of the story is that she appeared to them like something like monthly or weekly over a period of maybe 6 months, and she told the children that 2 of them are going to go back to God soon. They're going to die soon. And one of them will live for a long time and then go back to God. That's what she told these children, and these children are just telling adults. So unless they've got the craziest imagination, which children obviously do, but the key is that was happening in like 1917, and by 1919 or 1918, the 2 kids that they told adults that they were told by Mary that were going to pass away ended up passing away. And she didn't just say 2 of you, she said you and you. She named them, you and you. And in 1918, those 2 children that she claimed would pass away ended up passing away of the Spanish flu. And the one that she said wouldn't pass away ended up living until 2005, 90 years old. And the other verification before we get into the phrase is that within the last apparition, she said, I'm going to provide a miracle so that everybody can believe these things that I'm telling you. And it's going to happen on this date, at this time, in this place, and this place is where I've been appearing to you. And so there were 70,000 people who went to Fatima in this field where she'd appeared to the children. And at the time that she said it would happen, the sun began changing colors. It began becoming blue, red, yellow. It just was changing colors. And then the sun seemed as though it was going to collide into the earth. It got massive, like it was going to collide into the earth, and then became small again, and then danced from one side of the sky to the next. And this was happening for 10 minutes. And there was 70,000 people there. And the people that were there were a ton of atheistic people there. And they converted and began to believe in God after this event because nobody was denying it. Nobody who was there denied that it happened. And I tried to do research in regards to explanations. And the only explanations that people gave, that scientists gave, is that, well, you've got so many people who are looking at the sun and they just had a mass hallucination. So 70,000 people basically affirmed that this happened, and the way modern day scientists justify this in a secular worldview is that they just had mass hallucinations because they were looking at the sun, as though they were actually all just staring at the sun, and as though they would have mass hallucinations of 70,000 people. So all of that is incredibly bizarre that the story was verified in that way through the prediction of the deaths of the children. And I didn't even mention this, but essentially a prediction of World War I ending and World War II beginning. And then this situation, the miracle of the sun. And the phrase that she said, which I try to strengthen this belief. Beliefs are a really strange thing. It's really, we're not certain how one comes to believe in something, but I hold this belief, and I intuitively believe this to be true, and I try to water this belief, make it even stronger. But what she said is that if you await the chastisement won't come. But if you don't await the chastisement, you will be chastised. Meaning, if you live and act accordingly as though God has a certain desire for you, God has a purpose for your life, a certain way that you should be, a certain person who you should be, and you believe in that, and you want to respect God, and you want to love God, and you want to respect his wishes, and you don't want to be chastised by him either, then you would act accordingly and you would bring that to fruition. And you actually have to truly believe that it's coming. You can't fake it. You have to really believe it's coming. And if you don't await the chastisement, that's fine, but then you really are going to be chastised. So it's a paradox. It's a paradox, and I believe that is the solution to this inundation of everybody, of the mass nihilism from every different direction, trying to convince you that the world is going to end. No, it's only going to end at the behest of God. It'll end via God's will, via God's hand, and no one can do anything about it. Now, onward to the threat. I clearly didn't do enough to recruit members for this new group because when I arrived in room 303, Jack was already there a bit early actually, but no one else would show up for the first meeting. We were scheduled for 90 minutes, and at first I wasn't sure if we'd make it the full time. I was talking about psychology. Jack didn't respond. I was talking about debt management. No response. I assumed weightlifting was the reason he was there, but still no engaging response. It wasn't until I stopped tiptoeing the elephant that he perked up. I said offhandedly, "Yeah, kind of hard to focus on weightlifting goals when you're not sure if you'll be alive in 6 months." I faked a laugh. Ha ha ha. He said, "Not sure? We're certainly not going to be here in 6 months." That triggered my deep curiosity, and I asked, "Oh yeah, how so?" He said, "You're not actually paying attention to this asteroid narrative, are you? When has the government and the media disagreed on something? If we were playing chess, they're not going to telegraph the attack. If I were them, I'd make you think I'm setting up an attack from my queen, protected by my rook. As you start to protect that position and think yourself so wise, I'll then slide my bishop across the board and hit you where you're vulnerable, the spot you thought you were most protected. Now you have one more move, but it's over. No matter what you do, you'll be checkmated at my next turn." That's where we're at right now. It's our move, but checkmate is imminent. People think themselves so wise paying attention to the asteroid narrative. It is a fake attack. I admired him for being forthright, but what he said didn't make much sense to me. "So you're saying this asteroid narrative is a fake attack, a distraction? From what is it meant to distract?" He started talking about the magnetic poles shifting that would cause radiation to scorch the Earth for 6 days. We're well overdue for a shift of the magnetic poles. He said the world elites know it's coming, which is why they're indifferent to currencies and economies crashing from the printing of money. Then he was ranting about the greed and selfishness of humans and how we are a virus on Earth. It all began to make my heart race with anger because he was speaking so disparagingly of humans, and I am a human. I called him out on making general accusations against a whole species of conscious beings. Then he claimed that consciousness itself is the problem, to which I reminded him that he is conscious. He said his birth wasn't his choice. I asked him how he knows that for certain. Finally, to that question, there was silence in his pondering. I should have stopped there, but I was ramped up, and so I told him, "You better do something with your life or you're going to lose it." He immediately became defensive and somewhat hostile, claiming that that was a threat. I told him it wasn't a threat and that he should ponder it more, but that time for the meeting had ran out. We had a brief stare down, and he gave a slow, vengeful nod. Finally, he turned his back and walked out of room 303. I stood there for a moment, wondering if he'd try to attack me when I left, or if he'd report me for the acclaimed threat. I assumed come Monday I wouldn't have a job. Because my part-time job is as a technology worker, I have access to all of the keys, and I'd brought the roof key with me to the meeting. After pondering all of these potential consequences for a few minutes, I became apathetic to them and left room 303 to head up to the roof. The first meeting officially adjourned.